All right, I guess we can begin. So what we're going to be covering today is intel-driven threat hunting. Before we begin with that, I would just like to introduce myself and Jordan. We both work at VerSprite as consultants. A little bit of background about me as far as that goes. I'm relatively new to the industry. I've been in industry for about a year. I spent 13 years in the Marine Corps before this, infantry, and then 9 years as infantry, and then 4 years as a recruiter. Um, so with cybersecurity is definitely something I've always been interested in and something I've been passionate about as far as that goes. And I used to want to be just a full-time pen tester all the time. I'm just like, I just want to be that, and that's all I wanted to do. And then I ended up finding out about threat hunting and threat intel, and now it has turned something into a passion for me. So that's kind of where I come from. And then Jordan here, he is our geopolitical risk consultant at VerSprite. If you want to introduce yourself real quick, Jordan.
Hi all. So like Jake said, I'm the geopolitical risk consultant for VerSprite, which basically means I attempt to correlate geopolitical occurrences such as elections or trade disputes to changes in threat landscapes of companies around the world. Um, not so much not so experienced as Jake in terms of military experience, but I do have 2 degrees from the University of Illinois and a master's degree from the University of Chicago. So with that, Jake, I'll bounce it back to you.
All right. So we will get it going. So one of the big things that I love about threat intelligence and threat hunting is you not only have to think about the offensive side, you have to or think about the defense. And a lot of people think that in a blue team or defense environment, all you do is assess and analyze, and there's always noise out there, and that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve is like in a SOC environment, there's just so many alerts and so much noise out there that they just get tired of looking at alerts. So they're like, oh, this is not important or this is important. It's really hard to determine that. And so one of the things that I have been striving to work on is what can we do to eliminate the noise? And at my previous position, that was one of the things I constantly worked on, and here at VerSprite. And so I'm happy to introduce the intel-driven threat hunting. So what we're going to go over today is what threat hunting is in general, who will hunt, and what it takes to be a hunter, what you'll use to hunt. We're not going to go in depth into the technical side of what you're going to use, such as Wireshark or or memory dumps or anything like that. We're mainly just going to cover the methodology and kind of how you pick your tools and what you're going to use. Um, and then we're going to go into where do we hunt. And with where do we hunt, there's two ways that we determine where we hunt, and we're going to go both of those into an in-depth process, and then we're going to bring all this together at the end and utilize it to methodically hunt. And then we're going to have a little exercise at the very end as well, that we will open up the mics and we'll ask for you guys' input and we'll go from there. So, what is threat hunting? As far as that goes, when you think of defense and you think of what's going on in your environment, there's something that out there that detects, and it detects what we have already found in different environments, prehistorically from other companies and other organizations, and that's great that it detects it. But what's out there that you don't know? Like what's out there? Who's out there targeting you that you just may not be aware of, and how do you find them? So with the two different methods of threat hunting, there's reactive threat hunting. And in my mind, with reactive threat hunting, it's more of your incident response platform. You have an alert or you have a notification that something did happen, whether it's another organization, a government entity calling you and saying, hey, we found this on the deep web of a data breach or anything like that. And then that's when you go reactively looking for like, oh, where did this come from? How did they get this? Or an organization calls and says, hey, we're getting DDoS attacked from you. And then you got to look at it and be like, well, we didn't detect anything. Like our EDR protection or um, any of our logging or network detection, they didn't pick up on any of this. Like, why are they not picking up on it? And so now you have to go into hunting as to why. Why are they able to get into our network and use this? And it's more of a reactive. So reactively, they pursue abnormal activity on devices that may be signs of compromise, intrusion, or exfiltration. Now, proactively is the approach that many of there's actually quite a few people that have worked with me, and that's one of the things I've always talked about is of proactively looking. Why is somebody there? Look into why they're going to attack you. And so with the proactive, you iteratively search through the network to detect advanced threats that evade existing security. So with proactive, it's very hard to structure because it's like, what do I hunt for? How do I hunt for it? How do I get a baseline to go hunt in those areas? Because you go look at big corporations that have thousands of endpoints or huge network infrastructures. There's just no way that you can hunt in any of those and make it successful. There's no way you could go through their entire infrastructure in months. It's just very difficult to do. Um, so that's what we're here to discuss is how to proactively threat hunt through a network and actually create a plan to think like an attacker and how they develop a target and look at that and use that to drive your baseline of threat hunting. So I'm going to go a little bit more into reactive. It's more of a tactical methodology. So when you're in a SOC environment, an alert goes off, like let's say CrowdStrike goes off, and it says, "Hey, this device right here has detected a hash file for a certain Trojan, whether it's or Trojan malware or something, and it's calling back to a C2." And it starts alerting on all that stuff. It's current. It's now. It is or has happened. Like, why wait for that to happen? You wait for, that's basically just waiting for somebody in your network to poke its head out and be like, hey, here I am. And that's not always the case. It doesn't work like that all the time. And yes, it is successful. And yes, that you do package threat intel, or vendors do package threat intel to find those, but they have to be discovered first. So how do we discover that versus the now is or has? So it's driven by alerts and notifications, like I said previously. And for me, it's more of an incident response plan. That alert goes off. We go analyze the alert. We look into it and be like, all right, now we need to know how they got in, where they went after they got in, if they did go anywhere. And so, yes, it is threat hunting, but I think it belongs into your incident response lifecycle in the plan. Now we go into proactive, strategic methodology. It's you have to be very strategic with being proactive or doing proactive threat hunting. It's very methodical. You have to choose your targets and where to look, because if you don't look in the right areas, you're not going to find anything. And there's a lot of times where you will take this and you'll go try and threat hunt and you may find nothing, or you may find something. It's nothing out there that it pays instantly, pays dividends instantly. It's something that's going to help you out in the long run, though. You can efficiently mature and develop it as time goes on, and it's a baseline that you can develop over time and just continue to grow, and you can adapt to new new technologies, new people bringing into your organization, bringing anything new. So how many of you guys have seen The Croods, the movie, where the dad talks about new is bad, new gets you killed, new everything? And that's not the case. This is going to allow you to bring in new technology, new surfaces, and allow you to threat hunt and adapt for that. And so with proactive, you utilize indicators of attack, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and it also can provide early warnings if you're actively developing your threat intelligence, which we're going to get into a little bit later. So where do we begin? We talk about threat hunting, and I was talking about, like, if you proactively threat hunt, where do I go, and how do I choose that? So going to the reactive side, where do I hunt? Well, with the reactive, you're going off an alert or a notification of something happened. So you already know where you're going to hunt and where you're going to go from there. And then you got to decide who's going to hunt in your team, what people are going to have the right mindset. And it's nothing against other people. Everyone thinks differently, but you need to have a certain way of thinking to actually go out there and hunt and think like a bad person, and then utilize that to drive your hunt. and stay motivated, because there's a lot of times you're going to spend a lot of time in a network threat hunting and you're just be like, I'm not getting anything. Like, what's the point of me being out here? They're so locked down. But that's when stuff happens, is when you do get complacent and let your guard down. And it's very hard to have that mindset to go through and be like, I just need to keep doing this. I just need to create a new hypothesis and move forward. Um, and then what tools? A lot of people try and ask me all the time. They're like, well, what tools do you use to threat hunt? What tool can I use? And it kind of relates back to pen testers. Pen testers are like, oh, I learned Kali Linux. I learned Kali Linux. And the biggest thing I'll tell you is it's just a tool. So when you talk about like tools for threat hunting or pen testing, it's a matter of not only understanding how to use the tool, but reading the data. I can send you to buy a machine that reads the air machines on a car, and you go plug it into your car and you read the check engine light. Just because you can read the check engine light, does that tell you how to fix your car? If you don't understand what that's telling you, then what good is that tool? Just like Kali Linux or any of the other tools out there, such as the various other various forensics Linux is out there. Like, it's a tool. Yes, it assists you in your investigation, but it's only going to help you with how much knowledge that you have and your ability to research. And then how do we hunt? What do we do with each catch? Like, if we do find something, where do we go from there? Does it end there? Do we look somewhere else? And it's a giant life cycle that repeats itself. And it's what we're going to go into at the end. And it's very time consuming in that process, but the dividends pay greatly once you get down a process to threat hunt, and you can repeat it and do it over and be able to take all this stuff together and combine it into one thing. It'll pay dividends, but you have to constantly mature and develop it, or it's just going to halt and be squashed and go nowhere. So now I go into who will hunt. So I was talking about a little bit as far as the mindsets of different people, and everyone does think differently. And like in cybersecurity, you need diversity. You need people that think different ways. And there's nothing wrong with having multiple different people on different teams. And their mindsets, yeah, they may collide or they may think of things differently, but they may look at something and look at it differently and say, hey, this is important where other people don't think it's important. And now they just created a hypothesis that they can overturn and be like, hey, this actually adds value to the threat hunt where everyone says it doesn't. And I've had multiple times where I've overlooked something and somebody's like, well, why are you not paying attention to it? And I'm like, that's just a Chrome alert, or that's just a browser extension. And they're like, no, this is actually something else. And I just never thought about it until they actually reworded it to me. And I was like, that makes sense. Like that is actually very important. So diversity is huge. And then critical and creative thinking. And yes, you do have to be able to think like a bad guy in threat hunting. So much like pen testers, they actually do think like a bad guy. They look at how they're going to attack a company. They look at their surfaces and then try and see what's going to work. As a threat hunter, you have to be able to look through a pen tester's eyes or a hacker's eyes and look at it and be like, oh, this is a vulnerability. This is something they could hack. And this is something that we need to actively look for, and be able to go in there and not just be able to exploit what the actual hacker or the pen tester is looking at, but be able to exploit it and read how that exploit would look on our side so we can be able to detect it, whether it's through YARA rules or just log analysis. So it's very, very important that you can be critical and creative thinking. Objective. And just like I was talking about earlier, is you do need to be objective. You do need to be able to state why something is important to you. And there's times where people will come to me, or I'll go to other people and be like, look, I found this. And they just don't understand the reason why it's important. And they just are going to be like, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And if you feel like it's important and you have value in it, you need to be able to be objective and state why there's value in it. And you not only have to be objective, but there's a big saying that I learned a long time ago, and that's words mean things. You have to be able to describe it of why it has value and why it has value to that person. Because if you just tell them it's bad, they're going to say it's bad. Okay, what do we do next? You need to be able to describe why it's bad. The analytical mindset. You need to be able to assess, and this goes down to perspective and being able to be open-minded. So with an analytical mindset, And I use this as far as different companies, and because there's company espionage in the world, and I'll use Pepsi and Coca-Cola for instance. You need to be able to have an open mind when you look at a different attack. And let's say Coca-Cola hires a company and they say, hey, we were just had intellectual data taken from us. And you're looking at it and be like, all right, well, this doesn't make sense because Pepsi attacked. And so now you start talking to Pepsi as far as that goes, and you're just like, well, Pepsi attacked you. They're bad, they're bad, they're bad. But you never took a step back, never took a breath to think about why would Pepsi attack them. And then you go look at it and you'd be like, oh, well, Pepsi did attack them. You contact Pepsi and they're like, no, we actually had an incident ourselves. And you look at it and you'd be like, well, in reality, Coca-Cola was the target. Pepsi was just a victim. Like who was the main person behind this attack? Why did they drive that action? What was it? What motive was there? So when you go back and you look at perspectives and you look at motives, let's say Pepsi did attack Coca-Cola, and a lot of people will be like, well, their motive is financial gain, or they're a competitor or something like that. Well, in my opinion, that's not a motive. That's just in action, and that was a circumstance, or that was the motive to drive that action. But you go back and look at it, there's a circumstance, a feeling, or a belief that drove that motive, that action to happen for Pepsi to attack Coca-Cola. And you have to be able to take a step back, be open-minded, and think about it. And when it comes to that, you have to be able to look at different people's beliefs, the way they think. And the best way to describe it is deal with different current events that are going on. If you are raised a certain way to believe a certain way and you don't know anything different, that's that's your mindset and that's how you believe, and you don't feel like you're wrong. But then the rest of the world, they're like, that's wrong, that's bad. Well, for that person that was raised that way, they do a cyber attack. In their opinion, they are doing what is right and attacking based on a belief. And if you just go in and be like, oh, their motive was because they didn't agree with the company, you need to go back and look at like why they believe that way, the circumstances and the feelings. And that's where open mind comes from. And if you can't be open minded, it's you're going to go into the wrong direction of determining of why they attacked and how they attacked. And then diversity, and I talked a little bit back earlier, but one of the things I tell my team all the time is like, look, I don't need you to be a master of one specific thing. I don't need you to be able to go set up an Active Directory network and maintain it. But I do need you to understand how Active Directory works, what it looks like on the inside. So you need to be able to understand network architecture. You need to be able to understand OS architecture, not just Windows, not just Mac, but you need to be able to utilize Linux as well, because Linux servers run a lot in the world. And one of the things I try and actually portray to my team is like a lot of them just think of Linux as like Adobe Photoshop. It's just an application that you run and it does A, B, and C. Linux is one of the most diverse things out there that you can get it to do a lot of things that other operating systems can't do because of how Linux is put together. And so if you cannot understand how companies or organizations are utilizing Linux, whether it's in their automation, running Jenkins servers or running Git pipelines or running anything else, you're never going to be able to dig and dive deep into the weeds unless you understand not how to set it up, but understand the workflow and how it works and what it looks like on the inside. The next thing is you need to understand attack life cycles, and that goes down to the Lockheed kill chain, the attack tree. So if you can understand like an attacker was able to gain a foothold in, let's say, a Jenkins server, because I did bring that up earlier, and then from there they were able to gain access to the Jenkins server, and you look at it and be like, all right, did they have a Jenkins user or did they actually have root user on the Linux server? And then you just build your tree out and look at how that attack lifecycle relates to that tree. And from there, you can be able to form more hypothesis of who actually did it and where they're going to go next. So you can be proactive about it. And then offline investigative skills. So with threat hunting in organizations, attacks just don't happen in the digital realm. They happen a lot of times in our everyday interaction. And a lot of beliefs, or I mean, a lot of motives for attacks do come from our personal lives. So you go look at like different events that are going on in the world. If you have a CEO that is being bad to employees or being bad in the neighborhood or the city or anything like that, now that gives them motive to attack, and they're going to attack in multiple different ways, whether it's through cyber campaigns or through slander or anything like that. So you need to be able to go look at what's going on in the community, be able to talk to people in the community that are your clients or that you're working with to try and figure out their input and see what's going on in the world with them. And it plays a key role in investigating a lot of these the cyber attacks of why they did it. So what tool to use? And so I know a lot of you guys have probably seen the pyramid of pain. And it kind of just breaks up like how easy stuff is to be able to utilize. So with as I said earlier, like a lot of people ask me like, well, what tool do I need to threat hunt? There's multiple different tools out there. You have forensics tools from autopsy to volatility. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. There's tools out there for package captures, Wireshark, T-Shark to go through, Elk Stack, Logarithm. There's all these different tools out there. And there's just not one set tool that does everything. You need to be able to add to your tool belt and be able to adapt and use multiple different tools depending on the client, or if you are in a client environment, or if you're in an organizational environment where you're just working with one organization, and be able to utilize and adapt to their tools. And yes, some organizations will allow you to bring your own tool set in, or you can make a use case where words mean things. Say, I want this tool because it's going to allow me to do this. And yes, you have this tool, but it doesn't allow me to get what I need or want. So when you look at this pyramid of pain, you start out at the bottom, hash files. Hash files are one of the easiest things to actually detect. Every single file actually has a hash, and that's just as easy as going to VirusTotal or going to hybrid analysis and putting in a hash, or even if you have some of your own on-premise stuff like Cuckoo Sandbox, which is open source. It's a malware analysis machine that you can set up, and you can drop hashes in or URLs, and it does do a static analysis of everything. They're very, very easy to do. IP addresses are quite easy. You go to Risk IQ, you go to VirusTotal, you look up IP abuse, and you can detect the IP address as far as that goes. Domain names, yes, they're quite simple as far as that goes, but they're a little bit harder than the previous two. And then you get into network, host artifacts, tools, and TTPs. And that is where it gets a little bit hard. So with the tool-based detection in the tools and the network, host, and artifacts, that's where your antivirus and EDR solutions are going to come, your Yara tools, and specific detectors, vendor detectors, such as like FireEye. But the biggest thing with that is now you're relying on their threat intelligence to detect that stuff. Like the technology changes every day. People develop exploits on a daily basis. They develop technology that then can be utilized or exploited in attacks. And so they're not going to always have the current trends, and they're not always going to have the current detection methods. And so that is where threat hunting is going to come into play, because you're going to be able to find something that looks off, that is out of place, and you can be like, you know what, like this is something that no one's detecting. Why is no one detecting this? And this is bad. And then you can do research, and then you can formulate Yara rules or methods to detect it, and then you can give it to those companies and help other organizations out. TTP based detection. This is where it gets very hard with the tactics, techniques, and procedures, because this actually encompasses everything down below in the pyramid, but plus more of how a threat actor operates. And it's very, very hard to hunt for, but using a baseline to actually hunt, this is where this is where a methodology, a plan, or something set in place to actually help you hunt as far as that goes. So, sorry, I just got to refocus here real quick. All right, so what are you going to use to drive those TTP based detections? Like, what are you going to utilize? And that's where the question comes into play, is what are you going to use to screen out that extra noise to find those TTPs? How are you going to be able to hunt for the unknown. And that's where we created our methodology based on a threat model, and we use PASTA as far as that goes. And Jordan's actually going to go into this a little bit more, but this is going to drive into where do I hunt? What am I going to utilize to hunt? And go in that direction. So I'm going to hand it off to Jordan, and Jordan, it's all yours.
Cool. I actually think, Jake, if you go into the control panel, there's a give mouse and keyboard function. Maybe that'll help us with the transitions. If not, we can play it old school. Well, anyways, so we can move on to the next slide. So as Jake was saying, the attack methods and attack patterns that threat actors use against organizations, they change quite often. And in fact, I would say more frequently than even a daily amount. And it's important to remember what assets you prioritize and how to keep track of what threats and what information you as an organization need to be aware of. And one way to do that, as Jake was referencing, and the way that we do that at VerSprite is through the PASTA framework. So I'm actually going to overview PASTA in a very basic way, but you'll see how the framework basically provides us context for conducting OSINT research and utilizing it within our threat intelligence group. So just in case you don't know, PASTA stands for the Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis. It's offered by our CEO, Tony. And basically the overall mission of PASTA is to provide organizations a guide to assess realistic threats. Now, I'll go into what that means more as I continue. But for now, next slide, Jake. So how does PASTA work? Well, so in order to understand what information you should be collecting as an organization, you have to understand what information do you have of interest. And not only that, but what important processes, what important safeguards, what important roles, employee roles even, and even what important softwares and hardwares you use as an organization. Basically, you want to start to assess whatever it is in your organization that allows you to make a profit. Does it protect your reputation? Does it prevent you from facing a legal charge? Anything that could potentially compromise, quote unquote, your organization is something you want to note down within your library, within your understanding. So next slide. You want to start to understand how those things work together and sort of create a hierarchy of what's more important. Is this data flow, is this data process more important than this? Is this target data potentially going to create this sort of damage? And your key question is asking what that process, product, or service provides. Next slide, Jake. Then you're going to want to build a threat library. So a threat library, in the simplest terms, most convenient definition, is an understanding of possible security threats similar organizations face. So the keyword there is similar. So as we've just done within the PASTA framework, if you're following it step by step, is you categorize all the potential data flows, processes, anything within your organization a threat actor may want to compromise. Well, it doesn't do us much if we don't know what threat actors within the industry are targeting. And that kind of shift into looking at sort of either the industry or other similar organizations is very important, because if you're looking at different organizations, if you're looking at different industries, they're not targeting the same things. So it just doesn't make sense to research what threat actors are targeting if they're not a part of, if they're not targeting similar companies or industries. Part of, and this is a big part actually, and this goes right back to what Jake talked about as he was transitioning to the PASTA framework slides, which is you have to update your understandings of what threat actors are targeting often. And not only that, but as you'll see in the future slides, you have to understand how they're targeting organizations often as well. This is not a simple step of, you know, we did this once, Therefore, everything is fine, everything will be great. This is, it's a discussion that needs to keep on continuing. And Jake will even talk about that in the future as we start to talk about the threat intelligence and threat hunting life cycle. Next slide, please. So once you have an understanding of the assets, you've mapped out why they're important, and then you've begun to look at what threat actors are targeting in the industry, you want to get an understanding of what vulnerabilities does my organization have. And so a key idea here is that it's not just computer-based vulnerabilities. These could be all kinds of vulnerabilities. They could be physical. And that being said, that means that they can come from many sources. So a part of conducting a vulnerability analysis within the PASTA framework is that you're looking at all sorts of quote unquote causal variables or events, disruptions, processes that could present damages to your organizational assets. And you want to start to look at, how realistic are they, what damages they could cause, but more so you're mapping what could cause the damage. And to be completely honest, that also deals with looking at points of escalation or entry. But we'll talk about that as we get into threat modeling. Next slide, please, Jake. Okay, so you've categorized your assets, you've looked at what threat actors are targeting, and now you've looked at the vulnerabilities within your organizations. Now you want to start to assess your findings. What attacks are working frequently? What attacks are not working so frequently? What attacks are working frequently and really would cause a lot of damage based on the business objectives that you mapped in step 2? All of those sorts of things matter, and mapping them out and potentially changing the way that you proactively and even reactively threat hunt. Next step, or next slide. Here I've sort of mapped out exactly what I just talked about in the last 6 or 7 slides. I actually just want to take a second to let you guys read it, let you guys get a look at it. And we can return back to the slide if need be in the Q&A session. But it's pretty summative. It's pretty helpful. So I'll just give it like 30 seconds to a minute. Cool. Next slide, please. All right, so having said all of that about PASTA, I think it's important to return back to the main function or the main purpose of PASTA, which is to help businesses identify and prioritize safeguards for organizational assets threat actors may target. It's really important to understand that should be your key takeaway about PASTA if you've never heard of PASTA. Next slide. So having an understanding of what assets, what important assets in an organization threat actors may seek to target is an important step. What we want to do with that, and what we do with that at VerSprite, is we take that understanding and we put it into threat models. So this is where we really start to look at those points of escalations, the, so to speak, vulnerabilities or dynamics within an infrastructure that allow a threat actor to obtain what they want to obtain. Really just reiterates how I've described it. So on the next slide, we actually have somewhat of a picture of a
Hey, Jordan, just wait a second. You went quiet for a few minutes, or the last 30 seconds.
Oh, am I? Oh, am I back?
You're good now. Yeah, you're back.
Big oof, you guys. Big oof in the cybersecurity industry right now. So did we talk about threat models, or is that where I cut out?
That's where you cut out.
Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what PASTA is and the function of PASTA, we have to start to understand how threat actors could obtain what they want within an organization. So threat models are quite literally process maps of how threat actors could compromise or basically conduct an attack against an organization. The purpose of a threat model is to elucidate possible attack methods a threat actor may conduct. We'll jump to the next slide because I think the purpose of the below text, it will become clear within the next 2 slides. So next slide, yeah. So this is not a perfect representation of a threat model, but it is VerSprite's very own. We developed this within our SIGNAS platform, which is actually, it allows anybody on the internet to develop sticks to data and actually put it into a map. So in this model, it's not the clearest model, but it basically what it does is it says, hey, we have a threat actor up top, the government of Ethiopia, and they want to basically prevent the spread of unwanted information. In this case, they wanted to prevent bad reputation from spreading about their own government. And so what they did was they actually installed spyware on a bunch of media network affiliates. And in that case, how that spyware entered the systems of the media network affiliates and what that spyware allowed the threat actors to do from a technical standpoint could be considered a threat model. Next slide. So then that kind of elucidates why PASTA is important, is that threat actors don't act without a motive. And not only that, but they're not going to target a company without a purpose. And so the whole point of PASTA is to say, well, okay, what do I have in my organization that a threat actor may want? And why would they attack me? Or basically, what's the probability that they're going to attack me? And so basically what we see between the relationship between PASTA and threat models is that the function of threat models don't change. Basically, we want to know how a threat actor compromises and what they're able to do to get what they want within a business. But we see that the threat model entirely becomes more focused. It becomes more business centric. That is, we're really concerned with the assets they might collect. And we're also concerned with why. Why are they targeting our organization? So from a high level perspective, frameworks like PASTA can alter the purpose and significance of threat models. Next slide, please. So the benefits of specifically implementing PASTA into threat models is we develop a new term, which is organizational threat models. That is, we're very concerned with the assets and the process flows that a threat actor could disrupt. And part of using the step-by-step outline, which was shown in the picture and as I've discussed over these slides, is that we really want to use realistic data. We want to, get a sense of what's going on within the industry, and then we want to plan around that accordingly. Instead of, as Jake has referenced, and as we believe full-heartedly at VerSprite, instead of just staring at alerts, it's not state of the art, and it's not too practical. So I believe that's my last slide, Jake, but I'll let you take it from there. Oh, Jake, I think you're muted now.
Thanks, Jordan. Real quick, do we have any questions over threat modeling before we move on to the next part? I'm looking right now in the chat.
Please feel free to ask questions. This is totally a good time to take a second, assess if we need to correct any understandings or
Sorry.
further.
Scroll wheel. All right.
All right, Jake, I think you're on.
I know. All right. So why threat hunt utilizing a threat library? So the biggest thing utilizing a threat library to threat hunt is, like I was talking about earlier, is like organizations have a huge infrastructure. Where do you begin? How do you determine where you're going to hunt? And this goes back to the question, where do I hunt? Like, do I start in which network do I start in? Do I start in a production environment, a dev environment? Do I start on their main network or their corporate network where all the employees connect to? And it's very, very hard. But once you start looking at what the threat model does for you and you start correlating their attack surfaces, and you be like, you know what, this is everything that I think they're going to be attacked by, looking at the threat model. Not just digitally, but physically, based on who they've hired, who runs the company, where, like, their political standing in that country, whether they're a U.S. company operating in Singapore or operating in England. You got to take all that into account, and you, like Jordan said, you build that that threat model, and then turn that into a threat library. And so the biggest reason why is technology advances every day. It, like I said earlier, it just, people design new software, update software, people design different things to attack, um, or modify to attack different companies or to steal information as far as that goes. So it changes, and signature and heuristic detection methods just can't keep up with the evolving trend. There's just not enough security researchers out there. Not saying there's a shortage of them. It's just researching all these different events do take time, and there's just no keeping up for it, or figuring out how they're getting in, or how they're actually conducting a cyber attack, exploiting different companies. So you go look at the news and you look at different stuff that has been utilized in different attacks, and you just be like, I never thought of that. Like, how do we detect that? And there's stuff out there that hasn't been detected for months, and they'll just be like, this happened 6, 7, 9 months ago, and we just barely found out about it because this was just discovered 2 weeks ago. So utilizing the threat model allows us to evolve hunting around a baseline. So with that being said, you go look at the reactive, the baseline is that alert or that notification. Well, how do I proactively threat hunt with the baseline? And that is what the threat library allows us to do, is to set that baseline and to utilize that to hunt, and to update and efficiently update it, and be able to keep it as a baseline to drive future hunts. It drives architecture. It can even drive future pen tests as far as that goes. And the biggest thing is you view your organization as an attacker would, or a pen tester, or a threat actor. Like, that's how you view your organization, and you constantly use that to update your world around you. So threat intelligence, and so we move into threat intelligence, and this is something that I am very big on, and I'm a big believer of. Everyone today, from threat intelligence providers, they market it as like, you need this threat intelligence so you can analyze alerts, notifications, or anything like that. And I do not believe that's threat intelligence, raw threat intelligence. That threat intelligence right there is being marketed as a reactionary event. And yeah, it's great if you are doing incident response, but you're not developing it. You're taking somebody else's intelligence and that they turned into a product, and you're looking at it. And the way you need to look at it from a proactive measure is you take that threat intelligence, it's a feed, and you assess and you analyze and you develop it for your threat library. So as you look at your threat library, so you take your threat model and you look at all the surfaces that you're likely to attack. And then you research, when combine it with threat intelligence, where there's a couple different ways to do it. So right now, I actually modified a MISP, which is an open source malware sharing platform, to build a threat library and then attach threat intelligence to it, and be like, hey, this is stuff that we should use to hunt. So if you guys do have questions about that, you can email me afterwards, and I can talk to you a little bit through our process. But threat intelligence shouldn't be that reactionary. It shouldn't be anything other than a feed that you can assess and analyze and attach to your threat intelligence, or attach to your threat library, and you develop your own threat intelligence product from those feeds. Now, it does come in great in a different role in incident response or responding to an alert, but it really has no value to it unless you associate it with something that you're hunting for. So threat intelligence is going to allow you to know what is going on both digitally, geographically, and in your target markets and various other things. So when it comes to threat intelligence, people are like, oh, we have recorded futures, that's our threat intelligence. And like I said, they use that recorded futures, which they're a great company. They just use it for a reactionary event. When creating and developing threat intelligence, though, it's just not what is in the digital realm. It could be what you see on CNN, Fox News. It could be what you see on different blogs, what's happening in the world, different events. So right now with COVID happening, COVID could be a source of threat intelligence. You could be like, hey, COVID's happening right now, and a lot of hospitals are getting hit with ransomware because they are vulnerable because they're stressed out about a pandemic going on in the United States or anywhere in the world. So that could be a source of threat intelligence that you could analyze and look at and research out from the COVID pandemic and see, all right, what are some of the tactics or the techniques that they're targeting, and they're using COVID to mask it, and you build that into your threat library, and now you are creating your baseline of where you're going to hunt. And as you bring in new resources, new people, new technologies, you expand your marketing. So you expand your target market group. So like if you bring in a new product and you start selling a new product into a new space, and it brings in new competitors and stuff like that, you can actually grow your threat library efficiently and easily and be able to develop and mature over time. And like I said in the beginning, reactionary pays dividends at the time because now you can threat hunt for the alert that's happening. But proactive threat hunting, it's slow. It's a very slow process, but in the long run, it's going to pay huge dividends because now you're preparing for the future. You're preparing for the unknown that's already in your network, but also what could come into your network. So world events, history, offline. So earlier I talked about offline investigation skills as far as that goes. And what I mean by offline is stuff that's not happening in the digital world, stuff that's not happening in current cyber attacks or different services or vulnerabilities or different trends that are going on. You could go look at a company or a CEO of a company, and he may be the greatest CEO for the company as far as that goes, but he may be doing something illegal with other people or associating with the wrong people or treating other people badly. And now that just turned him into a target. And you have to be able to take those offline that the offline threat intelligence sources that you're gathering and be able to attach it to your threat library, because that does drive in action for a cyber attack, and it's very very huge in that aspect as far as that goes. So right there in threat library development, we take the organizational threat model. So we take the technology, business initiatives, we take the geographical location, the target market, competitors, suppliers, and I put in there the key point is individuals. And yes, I have had people be targeted because of the type of person they are, or the person they hung out with, or their beliefs, or anything like that. And they do get targeted, and they are the cause of a lot of cyber attacks. And then you take threat intel. So threat intel is, like I said earlier, is more than just technology. It could be military beliefs. It could be political beliefs. It could be movements, causes. It could be somebody having a belief that something should change. And when I go to talk about like the needs, wants, and motivators as far as that goes, there's a circumstance, a feeling, or belief that's driving those needs, wants, or motivators, and those are derived from religious, cultural, professional, politics, and different business and economics. And I go back to my Pepsi and Coca-Cola stance, and we talk about that. Coca-Cola was attacked, and they had intellectual property stolen, and Pepsi, they were a victim. They were just in the crossfires. But then you go look at a whole other company that attacked Pepsi and attacked Coca-Cola. They had a need or a want or a desire to be the best drink company in the nation or in the world. And so what ended up happening is they had that want or that desire to be the best, and they were looking at their circumstances, their feelings, their beliefs. They truly believed that they were the best drink company in the world. And that belief right there drove that action for them to attack Pepsi and then attack Coca-Cola and get the intellectual property to make their drink better, because they believe that and they wanted to make their belief a reality. And that's a lot of stuff that you have to look at when it comes to a cyber attack, is like, are they really doing this for financial gain? And if they are doing it for financial gain, or whatever the need, want, or desire is, what was that circumstance, that feeling or belief that drove them to want that need or that desire or want? And that ties a lot into your threat library and can be associated with a lot of stuff, and it will drive a lot of threat intelligence. So as you start looking or ingesting threat intel, whether it's from recorded futures or scraping the deep web or the dark web, um, or just pulling data from local news companies, you look at it and you could see a group that is targeting your organization or another organization, and they do target them and they say, hey, this is why, but what drove them to that want? Like, what drove them to have that desire or need to attack them? And you go look at their beliefs and they say their beliefs didn't align with our beliefs, we believe differently, or they did us wrong, it was a circumstance, that company poisoned our city, or that company was the worst thing that happened to our city. They really had that circumstance really drove that desire, need, or want into action. And that all comes into threat intelligence. And with these two combined, it builds our baseline. And that baseline now allows us to determine where we're going to hunt. So once you bring in the threat intel and your threat library and you look at it, be like, all right, this right here is a very likely attack. Like this activist group, APT 1000, whatever, it says, hey, we do not like this company. They're targeting the three specific companies that, let's say it's a financial financial technology company in Sweden, and they're like, this is all we target. And they are targeting only these three, and now we're an English company and we're bringing it into Sweden. Now we just got to look at it and be like, oh, well, they're targeting the three other companies, why would they not target us? And then you research, be like, these are their tactics, their techniques. Let's look into the architecture and make sure that we are able to detect these. And if we're not able to detect these, let's build this into our threat library so we can have active threat hunts looking for stuff outside of what we can detect right now. And that's where your threat library comes into huge value right there. I'm just pausing right here for a minute to see if we have any questions. Now that I got the hang of the webinar. All right. Apparently I don't have a hold of the webinar. Let me get back on track. Apologize. All right. So now we've covered. Can you guys see my screen still, Jordan? Okay. So now we've covered where do we hunt, who will hunt, and what do we use to hunt. Now, this is where the methodology comes into play, and this is how to hunt and what to do when we hunt, right? So this right here is the threat hunting loop. And the biggest thing from it is you create a hypothesis. This is what you're going to utilize to hunt. And every good hunt starts with a hypothesis. So you look at your threat library and you'd be like, all right, APT 1001 is likely to attack us because we're this type of company. And so now you create a hypothesis around their TTPs. Like I talked about earlier, hunting for TTPs is quite hard. But if you already know they're going to attack you, and there's already been research from prehistoric events that they did attack with, why not utilize that and like look into those specific areas, whether they go after domain controllers or whether they do phishing campaigns or anything like that. So you create your hypothesis and then you go into investigate via tools and techniques. So in the investigation, I will tell you my #1 tool that I use for every investigation, and it's going to be tricky and it's going to be hard to understand. And I'm going to get to that tool here in a little bit. And this tool is the start of every threat hunt that I do after I create the hypothesis. So after you investigate, you go into uncover new patterns and TTPs. And it's just not new patterns and TTPs, but let's say you do find something and you find it and you'd be like, all right, this is new. Why is this new? How did they get in? And you look at that. And once you start investigating that and conduct the forensics and you look at it, then you inform. So you inform the security team and say, hey, I did find this, and this is what they have right now. And you enrich the analytics. You search out and reach out to other organizations, search threat intel, and see if it's happened anywhere else. And if it hasn't happened anywhere else, then you need to dive deeper into how it happened, and that way you can record it and actually send it out, right? The other thing I want to bring up into Uncover is, let's say you do find something that has been documented, that, let's say you are running a EDR that's supposed to detect it and it doesn't. What has changed? What has been modified? What new strain are you dealing with? And how do you go about it? Like, you dig deeper into forensics. Who do you report it to, and how do you go about that? So that is all going to come into the uncover phase, is you actively finding something and then determining what you do with that intel and how you go from there. And the biggest thing is documentation, and you dig as deep as you can, and then you share. You enrich your data. You try and correlate all that data against other historic data, but you also need to share with the community, because maybe somebody else has the same issue and they just don't know it yet. And that is where inform and enriching is going to be huge. And Twitter, as much as I don't like Twitter, I'm not very active on it, but you go look at Twitter, people are posting findings all the time. On LinkedIn, people are posting findings all the time. In missed instances, they're posting findings. And that is the biggest way that we can share. But now, when you do publicly share like that, you can also tip to the threat actors, tip them off as to what you did find. So when it comes to actually finding something, you have two choices at that point. You can let them continue the activity and monitor and try and dig more deeper and gather more intelligence that you can build threat intelligence at, or you can cut them off and say you're done, you're completely out of the network, and then publish your findings so other people can find. So it's really a choice that is going to be made by people higher than you, or it could be possibly be your choice. But allowing that threat actor to continue to operate, allowing you to know that he's there, think of how much more data you can ingest, how much more threat intel you can build out of that, to actually in a week or a month, you can cut them off and be like, hey, this is more stuff that we found him doing, and now you can share it, and it will allow other people to actually gain from your hard work, as far as that, or gain from your hard work. So reactive versus proactive, and this is something that I've hit on multiple different times, because this is, most people in most organizations, they reactively threat hunt, and like I said, it is based on incident response. So when a reactive methodology, the top right there is threat intelligence alert IR. That is a reactive method. So some type of threat intelligence, whether it's your threat intelligence for your EDR solution, your network scanner, or agencies or other organizations alerting you of something, then that is that threat intelligence. It goes into an alert, and then it goes into the IR. So once it hits the IR, they go through and they start digging through and they do an analysis. And once they do that analysis, they're going to either say, hey, this is done, it's completely over with, or they're going to say, hey, well, what if they move somewhere else? And that's where threat hunting comes from, the reactive side. So from the analysis, they're going to look at it, they're going to form that hypothesis, and then they're going to go through the threat hunting loop, and they're going to do the malware and the forensics of everything, and then it's going to go right back into the analysis. If they do find anything else, it loops back from that analysis back into an alert, where they're going to conduct incident response. Now on the bottom side is just going to be proactive threat hunting. You're going to take your threat library, form your hypothesis and where you're going to search, start your hunting, look at the malware or the forensics or any artifacts that you do find, if you do find any, and then you're going to assess it, and then you're going to analyze. And if it is a huge issue, well, not even a huge, if it is an issue that it is a compromise, it goes directly into an alert, and then the incident response team will start doing incident response on that that affected asset or affected network or whatever it is. Now, it just doesn't have to go into an alert. Let's say you're doing an analysis and you're enriching the data and you're correlating it out there. Well, you can form new hypotheses and go into new hunts, and there's nothing wrong with it because it's all one incident that you are creating a multiple different hypotheses because you want the big picture, and it can repeat all the way back around. All right, so like I said, every hunt begins with an hypothesis. What are we hunting for? You analyze the threat library. So when I talked about taking the threat library and then associating with the threat intel, you need to assess what is the most likelihood of an attack, or what's the biggest risk for you. Whatever you and your organization feels is the most valuable to hunt for first, because you can't hunt for everything at once unless you have a really, really big team. You're going to apply that threat intelligence, and you're going to enrich that threat library with who's going to attack you, how they're going to attack you, the tool sets that they utilize, and the procedures that they're going to utilize those for. And then you can start hunting based off that. You formulate your hypotheses with that, and then you begin hunting. Now, I told you I promised you a tool, and some of you that have worked with me, they may laugh because I've talked about this tool a lot. So this is the #1 tool that I begin every threat hunt with after forming a hypothesis. And I look at the threat library and look at the threat intelligence, and there's multiple different ways you can utilize this tool, even in reactive threat hunting. So this is called the Diamond Threat Hunt model. There is a gentleman that works at Dragos named Sergio. He actually created this, and like I said, I was sitting in a SOC, and I'm like, there's just so much noise out there trying to figure out what's going on. And I started looking into threat intelligence, and I came across this, and I was like, this just doesn't make sense to me. And so I started digging deeper into threat intelligence and threat hunting and trying to figure it out. And then I finally learned how to use this tool, and this tool has been a game changer. Like you can almost relate everything in your hunt to this tool. So let's say we form a hypothesis from our threat library, and say we are a financial technology company. We're here in the United States, and we want to open an office in the UK, we want to open an office in Sweden, and we want to open an office in Singapore. And so I built that into my threat library as far as the geographical locations. We're a fintech company. We're operating in all these areas, and let's say we start ingesting threat intelligence and we start attaching it to it. Well, in Singapore, we're a huge risk there. There's a lot of threat actors that would target us, and I'd be like, all right, what are the threat actors that would target us? So I'd go through and look at all the threat activities that are happening that are targeting fintech companies, and let's say I come down to the top 3. Well, now I start up here at the top for the adversary. So I've researched the top 3, or those 3 threat actors, and I look at their TTPs, their toolkit, how they actually do, how they operate, and they are able to perform and go into, or they attack a network or attack an organization. And so I take their toolkit and their TTPs, and I look at the capabilities, and I look at their adversary toolkit, and I'd be like, all right, this is the malware toolkit that they're using to attack. What can they attack? And so I take all this data of the, like, let's say nanocore Trojan, and I look at nanocore Trojan, how it's dropped, how it's infected, and I look at this, and then I compare it to our threat library of what they can actually affect with the threat library. So from the threat library, I look at the capabilities of their toolkit, and I'd be like, all right, in the threat library, they can attack this infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean like web servers, services that they have public to the internet that they're hosting. As far as that goes, their DMZ zones, I look into that, and I utilize what these capabilities can affect those assets. And I do log analysis, looking through the packet captures that are happening around those, or just log data that is happening. And I look in the infrastructure, and if I do find an asset that's affected, then I go down to the target and I analyze the host. And I look at the host, and I'd be like, all right, this is what happened on this specific host, and it matches this threat actor. Let's say it's threat actor 1000. And now I've gone in a complete diamond. I went from adversary to the capability to the infrastructure and then to the target, and was able to find out what is happening. Now Now that we have a complete diamond, what are they utilizing? How do we detect against it, and how do we protect ourselves against it? And that is the greatest tool that you can use in threat hunting, because it helps you connect the dots and it gives you a structure to how you're going to um, search for the TTPs of a threat actor. Now, in a reactionary threat hunt, where we talk about incident response, you have an alert, and the alert goes off to this victim or a target. Let's say a endpoint such as a laptop it has an alert go off, whether it's CrowdStrike or FireEye or I mean CrowdStrike or Carbon Black or anything like that. Now you have the target. You do the host analysis. You find out what it actually alerted on. And you'd be like, all right, this is the nanocore Trojan, like I talked about earlier. That's the capability. So now I look at the capability of the nanocore Trojan and I figure out what they can do. Well, that doesn't necessarily relate to the infrastructure, so I can't really go across because I don't know where they're going to pivot to. I could take a bowl of spaghetti and throw it at the wall and try and connect all the spaghetti noodles together, but it's just not going to make sense. So from the nanocore Trojan, I can start researching, be like, all right, who utilizes the nanocore Trojan? And I start researching threat actors that have that in their toolkit that has been documented. And I look at the adversaries and I come up with 10, and I find those 10 threat actors that utilize it. Well, now I'm going to go back to my threat library and I'm going to look at all the intelligence, be like, which threat actors are actually actively targeting us, whether they're targeting us because of the type of company we are, because of the services, the target market, maybe some are associated with competitors, company espionage, or are they just targeting on target of target of opportunity because we do have this type of technology that we're using that is vulnerable. And I'm going to look at those and I'm going to reduce those 10 threat actors to maybe 5 threat actors, and I'm going to research their TTPs. And with those TTPs, I'm going to go hunt in the infrastructure based off those TTPs. And from each of those threat actors, you're going to form its own hypothesis, its own diamond threat hunt model where you're hunting in the infrastructure. So you can have multiple diamond threat hunt models as far as that goes. So those are two ways you can use the diamond threat hunt model in a reactionary or in a proactive. Another method that we can use as far as being proactive is, let's say we do have a critical vulnerability, something that is being exploited as a target of opportunity, that they're scanning the internet for, and we do have it and we have no mitigation. Let's say we can't update it because it will break our entire infrastructure, our entire workflow. How do you mitigate that situation? Like, how do you accept that risk? Do you take down your entire workflow and just to be fixed and lose income or revenue based on that? Or what are something that you can do? You can actually in place threat hunting. So with that being said, you already have your infrastructure of where you need to begin threat hunting, and you have nothing to detect except for manual threat hunting. So you start in the infrastructure and you do your log analysis, looking through package captures, system log analysis, or anything like that. And once you do find something, if you do find a victim, you can transition to the victim and start conducting a host analysis on the victim. If you find something fishy going on in the log analysis that when you correlate it with threat intelligence, and it relates to a toolkit such as malware or exfiltration of data, then you go look at the capability and be like, all right, what is going on? And you can pivot then to adversary, or you can pivot to target. So this is my #1 tool for threat hunting. When people ask me what tool do I use, it is the Diamond Threat Hunt model. As far as everything else, the tool is just, other tools such as Wireshark or Elk Stack, Logarithm, SIM, EDR. Those are just tools to help you in your investigation. They don't actually involved in every investigation. This tool right here is 100% involved in every investigation that I have done and will do. All right. So we go into the uncover, the discover of new patterns and TTPs from threat hunt. So as I hit on earlier, the uncover phase allows you to find new discoveries, new methods, new TTPs. But what if there's something in there that's already been reported and it should be detected on? And that's the biggest puzzle a lot of people face, is they go look at it and they're like, well, this will CrowdStrike or Carbon Black will detect this, which they're very good EDR agents, but it's only good as their threat intelligence. And this is where you need to sit back and you need to ask yourself, like, what is this doing differently that it can't be detected versus versus being detected? And you really have to look at it and be like, all right, well, the hash is modified. What did they modify in this to change the hash? Or what did they modify in this to change the C2 server? Maybe they changed the C2 server to a different IP, and now it's not being detected. And this is where you have to look at everything and you correlate it to a attack tree analysis. And so with an attack tree, you find something and you're in a box at the very top, you're going to say, this is what I found. And then you're just going to tree down to what it's actually doing. So is it running as root or admin, or is it running as a user? Is it running these type of activities at certain times? And you just start bringing all the information of the analysis into the tree, and you use that to form the pattern. And once you have that pattern, you go research different pattern or like different historical events of that same type of attack and see what is actually different, so you can actually report to different organizations or different companies that may be affected by the same thing. And so it comes huge in it to have the ability to share and to be able to document what you have seen and what you're actually working on, and to allow other people to see it. And sharing of information is one of the biggest things in cybersecurity that we are great at, but we also fail horribly. There's incidences that happened months and months ago, and they never released the incident until 6 months down the road. And come to find out, after they release it, 9 other companies or 9 other organizations have been affected by it, all because they want to save face and have a thorough investigation. And I'm not saying don't jump the gun and alert people of it and don't wait. Like, let's say you want to look at the actual attack and ingest the data for a month. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to judge the time frame, but we also need to work on a method to be able to communicate this, because it is happening. And the attack tree analysis is going to allow you to correlate the attack pattern to other incidences in regards to that. All right, now we go to inform and enrich. So with inform and enrich, you produce threat intelligence for what you discovered, and this is where the information sharing comes from. Now you take all that data, you take your notes, and you produce threat intelligence that you share out. Now, if you are sharing out to other companies, they may take it as like, oh, this is something we're going to use reactively, or this is something that we're going to assess, we're going to analyze, and we're going to use it proactively. That's really up to the organization. But when it comes to my team, when we produce threat intelligence from something, it still goes through our same analysis process once it's done, because the person hunting doesn't necessarily went into it with a full open mind. And this is where the open mind comes back. They may be so driven by the hunt and finding it, they may have missed something. So when we do discover something and we are building it into threat intelligence, we give it to another analyst to actually review and look through the work, not as saying the person that threat hunted, that actually hunted it, didn't do a good job, but maybe they'll see something. And this is where diversity and open mind comes into place. They may see something that they may have missed. What if there's something that they missed that could create a new hypothesis? What if there's something that they missed that is crucial to this investigation that could add into a method to detect it earlier? And so also in the inform and enrich, you develop the new hunting techniques, and that's another valuable skill from having another analyst actually look at it. And then enhance your security posture and update threat library. Both these go hand in hand. You now found an important source of, or a certain activity that you build threat intelligence out of, a new attack surface that you can efficiently build this into your threat library and basically or expand your new baseline. And this new baseline, just because the hunt's over, you have added it into it. It's not like you did a huge change to your threat model, a huge change to your threat library. All you did was simply add something into it and adapt a new baseline that you can use to drive future hunts. All right, so I'm going to go over the recap of what we talked about, and we do have a PCAP to give out to you. We just don't have enough time to do the analysis here. But I am going to open up the mic to talk about what we kind of do with tabletop exercises. And I'm going to say, hey, we're a company, and I'm going to give you a scenario of the company and the type of company we are, and or a type of company they are, and give you different stuff that we can actually Q&A of what type of threat intelligence that you're going to search for and the type of stuff you're going to look for. So today we went over threat hunting, and we went over who's hunting, the tools, and what are we hunting, and how we get that data. So or where should we hunt? And that goes back to the threat model and PASTA methodology. And then we went through the threat hunt model as far as the different threat hunt loop, threat hunt loop, and then going back and repeating that cycle in the diamond threat hunt model. So right now I will open up the mic. We can ask some questions, and then we can go into the tabletop exercise. All right, Patrick, you have a question? I open up the mic for everyone. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, sorry about that. Thanks for the presentation, guys. Really appreciate it. I was an intern for VerSprite in the spring, so it was really interesting stuff. So I have a question, sort of, I guess, about operationalizing a lot of the methodologies you guys were presenting. So, you know, for lack of a better term, when we're researching all this stuff, it's quite easy to kind of get lost in the sauce and get sidetracked and go down rabbit holes, which is sometimes really important to finding stuff, but can be kind of hard to prioritize. So I guess I'm thinking in terms of timeline, because depending on the project, you're going to need to spend more time, you know, on each step. But is there sort of like, what are you, I guess this question is addressed to both of you, like, how do you sort of map out the process in terms of time or task prioritizing?
With timeline and task prioritization, as far as that goes, that is actually very, very hard to do, because it really depends on how big the infrastructure is and the organization is. So when you go through and you build your threat library, so the threat modeling and threat library can be very time consuming, and then research into threat intelligence is very time consuming, and that's where automation is going to come into play. So you have to be able to look at your threat intelligence, your feeds. So with threat intelligence feeds, you could be connected to Circle, which is a great threat intelligence feed. If you're worried more about malware, there's a lot of different threat intelligence malware feeds, including Zero to Automated, which is a new malware automation course. They actually have a MISP instance, and they publish a lot of good malware that they actually have, and it's a course that they teach people to reverse engineer. If you're looking at just regular open source intelligence, it's going to be whether your analysts have, or the time frame that it takes them to go and conduct OSINT on the company. So as far as timelines, building the threat library and all that is time consuming. It probably take a month or 2 months. Now, the biggest help will be automating your threat intelligence as far as that goes, signing up for different threat intelligence, signing up for different feeds, and having a method to ingest that data. So for my process of how I do threat intelligence is I use MISPs, and they're malware sharing platform. And I actually have one MISP that I just collect feeds from, and it creates new events, whether it's web scrapers or different MISP instances or different RSS feeds. And we go through and we validate that data. And once we validate that data and assess it, we then export it into what we call as a central MISP. And we take that central MISP, and that is all data that we have turned into a product. and we tag it with our own taxonomy. And then we have what we call is the library MISP, or we call it client MISP, but it is our library MISP. So there we build threat libraries, and in the threat library we utilize the Galaxy port feature in the MISP. And so as we collect data, we will push data to the MISP, the threat library MISP, and as data goes over there, the Galaxy will tag itself with events, and then we look at how many events are associated with that I'm trying to think what is described, that value in the library, and then that's how we go from there. And the threat intelligence has already been analyzed and processed by us, and we use that to initialize and drive our threat hunts. Now, as far as once you have that portion of where you're going to go, and you have your hypothesis formed, those threat hunts, they could take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to a month. It just really depends on how big the organization is. Does that answer your question? I know it's not a 100% like a 1 week, 2 week, 5 days answer, but that's the process in which we do it.
Yeah, no, that definitely does. Thank you. I wasn't expecting an exact number, you know, so I appreciate it though. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so we do have another question from Ada. Great presentation so far. How will VerSprite take advantage of the recent leak of Iranian hacker instruction videos? That is a good question. I have not read too much into the leak of the instruction videos. I will actually look that up right after this presentation, and I can email you and let you know what we are going to do with it. So
I think I might have to join you on that research there, Jake.
all right. All right, did we have any other questions? Oh, no, Ada, I already saw your question. Did that answer your question, Ada? Okay. All right, so we have a few minutes left as far as that goes. And I brought up a company earlier talking about a fintech company. So in this tabletop exercise, we are a financial banking company here in the United States, and we're looking at moving international. We really have no technology. We have mobile apps, and we decided to move international and be an international banking company. And we are opening offices in Australia, and we are opening offices in Italy and Spain. So from that starting point, what are some of the stuff that you guys think that you guys should assess and build into your threat model and look for? Anyone typing in the chat? Corruption. Okay. So corruption in Italy. So you're looking at the corruption mafia. That is a great thing to build into your threat library. So when we look at the threat model and say, yes, we are going to go to Italy, and you start building out your threat library, you build out your technology wise. So your mobile app, you build out how you're going to offer your online services in the domain. And now you're talking about corruption in Italy. So we're looking at blackmail, we're looking at bribery, right, Jordan? You have anything you want to add to that side of it?
Sorry, you're looking to locate in Iran, is that correct?
No. Italy.
Italy.
Yeah.
Political corruption is common in Italy. So is small sort of collective crime. There's also a distinct difference between North and South Italy in terms of organized crime. So that's something to pay attention to. Not only that, but not so sure Italy is doing too hot on the economic scale. So GDP in terms of like economic growth, in sort of the business climate that could happen in Italy is definitely something you want to take a look at as well. And actually how that might play a role in the future activities of criminals is definitely something you want to pay attention to. If you were
okay.
Yep.
So that would be something we would build into our threat library and to actively gather intelligence on. So some of the intelligence you could gather is the news around the mafia, the different events that are happening that they are actually doing. Nancy brought up a good point with the online meetings, because yes, they are going to have online meetings with the parent company back here in the United States. And so they look at all the different meeting platforms that they do use. So Zoom just actually had an issue as far as that goes, and all the other companies, they do have that. So yes, education at all levels, and now with online class, yes, that is a huge concern. And me being a parent, as far as that goes, and looking into that, yeah, so let's say I am in Italy and I am doing online banking over there and I am working through that. Now I'm actually downloading their software. Let's say I'm an employee and I end up getting phished by getting invited to a online meeting and I go to log in and it was fake. Okay, so privacy and other regulations, that is true. And let's say I do sign on and download their software and I just can't get it to work and I end up being phished as far as it goes. Well, my kid will use the same laptop to go do the education, go do all that stuff. And it's not necessarily that I'm worried about them stealing something from my kid, but it's a matter of what my kid's doing can be exposed to the threat actor. So I do agree with the online meetings as far as that goes, and the education, privacy and other regulations. Yeah, so the privacy and regulations, those are a great attack vector. So some of the things like we go to Italy and they have a certain type of regulations, and we're trying to, as the U.S. company, to be like, hey, we want more leniency on this regulation. Or another bank over there could be like, hey, we want you to be tighter on this regulation because we can't be competing with you, and we're going to do A, B, and C, and then it's competitor against competitor. So I can see that.
Going back to the education at all levels, those communication softwares, Jake, aren't those threat vectors or potential threat vectors?
Yes, it really depends on the communication software that's being utilized. So each one, like no one's perfect. As a developer or programmer, there's what is called a fence post error. So you take a 20-foot or you take a 20-foot section, you want to build a fence for the 20 feet, and you want to post every 5 feet. Most people will say, I only need 4 fence posts. But when you look at it, if you only do 4 fence posts, you leave a 5-foot section at the end with nothing securing it. And people are human, which is the biggest attack vector. So as people start coming up with these ideas and they start programming stuff, they program for what people like and what are easy for them, because people are creatures of habit. They want to get a routine, they want it to be easy, they want it to be repetitive. And so they start programming, making errors, trying to appease other people, and it ends up turning into an attack vector. So a lot of communication platforms, they do have an attack vector in some form. So yes.
Definitely thought I heard something about that in the news. So we're a fintech company looking to locate in Italy. What else?
A bank company.
Oh, a bank company.
Not fintech. We're a bank.
Gotcha.
We're looking at going international to Spain, Italy, and Australia.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we've come up with some very good ideas as far as what we would integrate into our threat library. I do have a packet capture as far as that is the endpoint, the resolve of the diamond threat hunt model for a said bank. If you guys would like it, my email should be attached to this. If not, I will email you guys with a link to actually go download the packet capture, and I will allow you guys the opportunity to go through it. And if you guys do have questions or struggle, by all means, email me back and I can set something up to talk you through and walk you through it. We're actually almost out of time, so is there any questions real quick before we end? Oh no, those questions were answered, Andrew. You're welcome.
Thank you for attending, and that goes out to everybody.